Welcome to another edition of Working with Gen Z. Friends, we often say in leadership that there is a need to build a T shaped leader. Now, what do we mean by that? We're trying to say that when a colleague or an executive reaches a certain stage in his career, he's built a certain domain knowledge, but over a period of time, as he enters into middle management or looking at large teams, there's a set of skills and competency that are essential for him to succeed. And when we talk about those competencies, we're really talking about things like collaboration, conflict, and influencing becomes one of those skills as well. Now, there is a view that is that a skill that is just needed for middle managers and senior managers? But we're going to try and see that, okay, how do we look at a skill like influencing for the Gen Z? And why is influencing such a critical skill in that T-shaped leader format? The reason is simple that today influencing is becoming so important, whether you want to take your idea for an innovation, whether you're working in a matrix organization, whether you're trying to get your customer to buy something, influencing is something that everybody needs. And we have just the expert to help us look at, how can we become better at influencing? We get what influencing means, but are there certain things that we need to do? Are there certain things that come in the way? And so we'll explore influencing in a lot more detail. And to help me with that is my guest and a good colleague, Ed Barrows. Ed, good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Nikhil. It's wonderful to be here. Great to see you.
Fantastic. Ed, I want to ask many questions on influencing, but I know you have a stellar and a very, very illustrious, background. So tell us first about your story, what you do, and then we'll dive into influencing.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Well, thanks again for being here and thanks for listening in. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to Gen Z a little bit on their career journey and those who are trying to make sense of Gen Z or any generation. You said something at the outset before I jump into my CV I thought was really interesting. You said, persuasion and influence isn't just for senior leaders. But as you were saying that, I thought maybe that's how people got to be senior leaders to begin with, right? Was through influence and persuasion. But a little bit about me. I live in the United States in a northeastern portion, Boston, Massachusetts. I work at a university called Brown University. It's one of the Ivy League schools. So Providence is where Brown is. We're situated about halfway, a little bit maybe less between Boston and New York. So we're in a great corridor for a lot of financial services, healthcare. A lot of people. It's a vibrant university environment. But you and I had the chance to know each other when we worked at Duke Corporate Education. I was there for 8 years as a managing director. And one of the things that I noticed when I was there, and you may have noticed it too, was Duke Corporate Education does a wonderful job teaching high potential, developing and instructing high potential leader programs. And as I was teaching those programs and designing them, much like you, I started realizing that the same types of skills were being taught over and over. But I thought, there's a lot of people out there who are great leaders or aspire to be that maybe they won't get a chance to be in a high potential program. Not that they aren't high potential to begin with. And I thought with a colleague of mine, Laura Downing, we put together this 12 skills thinking, and we went out and surveyed a bunch of different literature and used our own experience, having taught at a variety of U.S. universities. She teaches at Harvard, as did I before I joined Brown full time. And we said, these 12 skills in our book, 12 skills are what we think is about 70 to 80% of the skills these leaders who aspire to develop in an organization need. And we think they're kind of timeless skills, like you talked about: collaboration, strategic thinking, building relationships. And one of those things is persuasion and influence. And so we put together the book, and there's a workbook that goes along with it. But the idea is we tried to identify some of the core thinking that anyone can really incorporate into what they do day to day. And if you, like you talked about with sales or influencing colleagues, it's not just if you lead a team, because organizations are flatter today. We tend to work with parts of organizations, both inside and out, that we don't directly influence. They don't report to us. So we have to have skills and capabilities that enable us to get things done, even in instances where I don't have, direct authority for someone else. And many organizations are like that. So we really think it's essential to build these kinds of persuasion and influence skills in order to be effective. And really, that's in any role. You're absolutely right. Senior leaders have to be effective in this regard, but so do middle managers and even early career people. And someone might be inclined to say, "Well, I'm an individual contributor. I don't need these kind of skills." I'd say you do as well because you manage projects or you do work. You have to prioritize with other people. Very, very few people work in total isolation. So if you work with anybody else, you'll probably need influence and persuasion skills in some capacity.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well said there. And I think we're gonna get to know a little bit more about the book later in the show. So let's put that for a minute here. But I do want to start, as you mentioned, the 12 skills in your book, and influencing is one of them. So let's start. I'm gonna start just the very basic here. People sometimes. Again, as you worked with Sony leaders across the globe, and obviously we're familiar with the parlance and we use it often in our work, but it could be that sometimes, the term influencing or persuasion, and I'll even throw negotiation gets put in interchangeably, right? So help us understand what is influencing. Are we talking about when someone makes a new decision as a result of it, or are we just nudging them? What in your view would influencing kind of just a loose understanding, not a definition, perhaps?
Right, and it's a great question. In fact, that's typically how I start off with most things is asking people, "What do you think influence is?" Influence is really the activity. Some people call it art or a process, but it's getting people to really do things that you would ideally want them to do that will be beneficial, not just to you, but your organization and even to them. We always think about these principles and practices as being done ethically. It's very important. But if you look at politicians, if you look at senior leaders, even if you've tried to, you said negotiation, that's absolutely right. If you're negotiating for something with somebody, you're trying to do some type of, you've got some type of bargaining occurring. I'm trying to influence you, or you try to influence me on what a final price is or what we're negotiating for, including it's a process of going back and forth and trying to help people understand and really adopt your way of thinking or do something that you want them to do. I would say the way of thinking is probably more in the line of persuasion, where getting them to act is more along the lines of influence.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Very nice. I think this was. I wanted to just kind of uh, put that out there just so that people understand that are we talking about what does it entail. So let's now go. Ed, you obviously mentioned a little while back saying that we think that we've echoed this several times in our workshops and client programs that yeah, senior leaders better become good at it, if they're not already kind of acquired that skill. But here we're talking about a different cohort, the Gen Z, which is, strictly going by the dates, the eldest of the Gen Z would be about 28, 29. Now, there is often one could put the tag that they're fairly inexperienced, right? Or as you mentioned, that they could be taking on a role which is largely more execution oriented. In that kind of a context, how do you see does influencing become relevant for them, right? And they tag about inexperience, right? So where do they start their journey about influencing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Inexperience is always a tricky word to use, and I try not to label individuals or generations as such, but oftentimes people are newer to the workforce or newer to roles, even supervisory, first level supervisory roles. So influence has a lot to do with building your own credibility as a, we'll call it a professional in the workplace. And to be fair, people, even if they've not been in a formal organization prior to have influenced, you've influenced brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers. If you've ever wanted to stay out later past a curfew, that's influence, right? So I would give people a lot more credit maybe than they might be accustomed to because they usually are used to this. But in the workplace, a lot of your ability to influence comes from your own, what we'll call credibility and your competency. If you're someone that's seen as trustworthy, who's good at their work, if you're someone who is perceived as being effective and you meet deadlines, things that are usually within your control, oftentimes you've gained some ability to influence others. So if you're someone that always delivers things on time in terms of a project, and someone asks you to do something, you say, I don't think I'll be able to do that now, but I have other work. I could do it at a later point. That's starting this practice of influence. But a lot of it's predicated on the person recognizing, okay, this person usually delivers things or get things done on time, he or she probably really does have other things that they have to work on. I'm willing to negotiate with them. And just understanding some basic behaviors, asking questions, trying to understand what people need and what they want, really getting into the mind, so to speak, of the people you work with, what's important to them. Because that's how you can build relationships and then start to influence people. If you have good credibility, good trust, good influence, and good relationships, rather, then you're in a position to be able to, tell people in this little example we were talking about that, I can do this next week, but probably not this week because I have these other things that I need to wrap up.
Yeah. No, you make a good point. I think influencing is sort of part of our daily life, so much more than what we often think about it. Now let's start at something which is very crucial. Every Gen Z will likely want to know this, or even if you are kind of managing a Gen Z, we've known people, we've known leaders who are fantastic at influencing, and they can quite literally, kind of influence you in a way where you buy into their ideas or
Yeah, right.
yeah. And so obviously I have twofold questions here. One is that, some of these leaders, we can say that, have they built this over time or they naturally gifted? But coming more importantly to the Gen Z, if I'm a young Gen Z, I'm curious, I'm hungry, I'm willing to learn. How do I begin my journey for influencing? Do I read a book? Do I shadow under a good mentor? Or do I do a combination of things, right? What are the ways in which I can kind of gain that skill set?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I would say yes to all of those things. So one of the things that I typically do in my classes that I'll ask people is I'll say, okay, you've been at work for, even if it's not a very long time, think about someone that you work with now or have worked with who's really influence, and ask yourself, what is it about that person, sort of as an individual? What is it about their behavior that you believe contributes to them being a good influencer?
Mhm.
So first off, studying other people in the workplace and asking questions of yourself, saying, what is it that makes Nikhil so effective as an influencer? And really making a note of that. Now, to the next point that you made, which I think is equally as effective, is find someone that you think is good at influencing and ask them, "Hey, how do you think about this situation?" When you're stuck being asked to do something but you don't have time, how do you manage that in a way that doesn't seem abrupt or brusque to the other party, where they actually understand that you have other obligations? I'm using that example. But absolutely true to your last point is there's a set of influence principles. Robert Cialdini, who is a professor, I believe, at Arizona State, I think it is here in the United States, has written a book called Influence. It's not a new book, but he, years and years ago, he's a psychologist, a social psychologist, went and studied salespeople and people who worked in different environments who were effective and really distilled down what they did into a set of influence principles. And there's 7 of them. I'll go through each of them. I'm happy to if you want. But there's, to your point, there's several good books out there on how to influence and persuade. But that's probably, I won't call it, the best one, but it's one of the more well-known ones. But in a class that I've taught, what we do is we will go through and teach those principles very quickly, and then we'll ask people to try those on their own at work and see how well they work. And they don't work all the time 100%, but more often than not, they are effective, but they're based on sound research and practices of what makes someone influential.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think what I'd like, and since you mentioned, maybe just very, very briefly could touch upon the 6 principles or the 7 principles. But I think more importantly, I'm curious, as we've seen it in our line of work, that you may have the knowledge, but it could take a substantive time to become good at it, right? So my second question to that is that what comes in the way, right? Whether it's a senior leader or even the younger Gen Z. And I think I want to stress this even more as we're doing this for them, that okay, you're starting out a career, and let's say you're lucky enough to be where you have a boss, or you've read this book, and you talk about influencing in your book. So I think, like you said, there are lots of experts such as yourself. So the book becomes one source that what else can do, right? So help us with that. Maybe briefly touch upon the principles and
Sure.
generally what comes in the way.
I think to answer your second question first, one of the things that gets in the way is people's reluctance to try some of these things. Any skill, whether it's playing the piano or public speaking or being good at golf or cricket or whatever the sport is, you get better at it. You practice it, you learn the right techniques, you get someone who can coach you and you do it. So I think, having the desire to go out and actually try to become better at influence is the first step. You have to want to do it. But then you need to be a bit of a student of it, but also practice it. So, what are the seven, influence principles? They're pretty basic. And actually, if you really think about it,
Mhm.
some of these things are not really, won't come as a surprise, especially to Gen Z. And here's why. So we tend to, one of the first principles is liking. We tend to wanna be around people we like. And so, you have a set of friends that you hang out with or do things with. I'm assuming you like those people, and that's why you do that. We tend not to gravitate toward people that we're, disinclined not to enjoy being around. Well, what's the principle there? Well, in the workplace, there are things you can do to be more likable, and some of the things are quite benign. Smile more. Ask people questions about their weekend, what their hobbies are. Show a genuine interest in other people and be willing to help out if they need help. Cheer someone up. You can take them to lunch or whatever. Just get a coffee and practice your listening skills. But becoming more likable is a very, very simple way to focus on becoming more influential. Now, some people might say, well, I just go to work and do work. That's heads down. I have a lot to do. I respect that. But you're missing out on an opportunity to influence other people by just getting to know people a little more personally. So that's one basic principle. Another one is what's called reciprocity. This has been shown across cultures. So I'll ask you, have you ever been invited to someone's house for dinner? Have you ever been?
Yes, I have.
And if someone says, "Would you like to come over on Saturday for dinner?" What do you usually think?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to come.
Right, but when you come, what do you do?
Yeah, I will like to give them a gift. I'm looking forward to meeting new friends or catching up with old friends.
Absolutely. So you say give them a gift. Now, I didn't tell you you should give them a gift, but oftentimes we feel a sense of if someone's going to do something for me, I want to reciprocate. That's what reciprocity is. It's this quid pro quo that we experience. It gets into social exchange theory. And if you don't bring a gift, you feel bad, and the other person might feel like, "Well, I invited Nagil to dinner, but you didn't bring any flowers or candy or anything." So there's a social expectation. So say, "Well, that's interesting, Ed, but I'm not going to anyone's house for dinner this weekend." But at work, if you help people when they need help, you built a little equity where you can say, "You know what? I could use a little help, or I could use an extra day off this week, or I'd like to really be considered for this special project." So by building this goodwill or making investments, creating an environment where someone, looks to reciprocate, you become more influential. In one of the classes we had students after we taught a reciprocity go do it and come back and report the next week. I thought this was fascinating. We had I was a younger person. It wasn't Gen Z, I don't believe. But he was fairly early in his career in a technical company. He said, "You know what I did? I found out when the CEO's birthday was." Now, I wanna be clear, I'm not advocating any of these techniques. He said, "I went out, got a really nice, tumbler, that you can keep sort of, cool things cool in and warm things warm in. I got a nice card, and I said, 'Happy birthday,' and I gave it to his executive assistant and gave it to him. The next day, he called me into his office. Now, this he didn't meet regularly with the CEO, and he said, "Now I go to lunch." I talked to him for about a half hour. Now we go to lunch once a month and get a chance to spend time together. So this person has now influenced through reciprocity the leader of this entire organization just by thinking about how do I take advantage of the reciprocity principle. So it's pretty creative what people come up with when they think about these things. Now I'll go through these a little quicker. Commitment and consistency. That was what I talked about with credibility. if you've ever worked with people, and even if you're early in your early career, there are some people you can count on and some people that you can't count on so much. The people that you can count on are going to become go-to people. I know whenever I ask Nikhil to do something, if he says yes, he's going to do it. And if there's a problem, he's going to let me know and he's going to try to make up for it. So demonstrating that commitment and that consistency, really shows that you're someone that can be relied upon. It builds your credibility and influence. Social proof. Most of us, if we're going to go out to dinner, the reviews of the restaurant if we've never been there. My wife always asks, "Show me the pictures of the food." I don't know why it's very important. I have to physically have to show all the pictures of the actual food. That's called social proof.
Yeah.
We haven't eaten there, but have other people eaten there? Have they had a good experience? What are the things that they would say about this venue? The same thing is true at work. If you're good at your job or you're good at whatever it is you do, you've got social proof, meaning other people will start to talk about, hey, when I work with Nikhil, he always does a great job. So you're building this sort of suite of evangelists who will talk favorably about you. And if you like them and do good things for them, they'll be more than happy to do that. Another one is expertise or authority. And this could actually be really useful for people early career.
Mhm.
We tend to, if you've ever been to a doctor, a medical doctor, you might be in their office and you look on the wall and you see, oh, that person went to that medical school. That's good. That gives them authority and expertise, shows that they're an expert at something. Say, well, I'm not on this podcast. I'm not going to become a medical doctor, Ed. Perhaps not, but you can get a certification. You can take a program online. If you're a project manager, you can get a project management certification. So something that demonstrates your expertise gives you credibility and then authority. I know that this person has taken a class on this or has a master's degree, a certificate, but there's all kinds of, especially with online education today, you can make all kinds of investments in yourself that pay off just by simply doing the course, getting the certificate, whatever it is, putting it after your name if you're like a CPA or a CA, and letting people know. Now you're letting people know, oh, by the way, you're an authority on this. The last one I'll talk about is this concept of scarcity. And this one is very interesting. And I think people sometimes at first struggle with this. When someone is always available to work on a project, we have sort of this sometimes a peculiar response. I think, well, if that person's always available, they must not be working on anything very important, right? Because they're always available. So one of the things I tell people is, and it sounds a little odd, it's like, don't always be available, right? If you're working on something else, or if you have another priority or project, I'd love to be on your podcast today, but I've got several things I have to do this week, Nikhil. I can do it in a couple weeks. It gives the sense that, oh, that person's important. They're working on important things, and he or she might not have a whole lot of time because they're working on other important things. So all of these things taken together, the last one is unity, to build sort of unity in an organization, to get people to become kind of an opinion leader. And that goes back to your senior leader example. When you can build unity through projects, getting people on the same page, thinking the same way, all of those things collectively build someone's influence. But you don't have to be great at all of them. You can start anywhere, and that's what we encourage, is find something that you think you would like to try out and work on. You'd be very surprised at how well they don't always work, but some of them work very, very well. And I think you just have to have the courage to give it a go.
Yeah. No, fabulous, Ed. That was excellent. I think you've just condensed the 7 points so beautifully, and I just wanted you to take a few minutes because I think that also gives, especially for the Gen Z, to really, I mean, in a nutshell, to understand what are the elements that they could use as a way to become better with influencing. Right now,
Mhm.
I want to ask one other thing here, Ed, is that you've seen leaders and obviously we can all think of people who are very good with influencing. I want to bring a generational lens, which is to say that if you are a senior leader, and I'm going to use the generational parlance, whether from boomer to an X, let's say millennial to Z, right? Does the Gen Z benefit in any way, or does it hinder them anyway because of their context? In other words, they're very good with technology, and they're very good with digital. They're very good with everything else that we think in that space. So does that come in the way, or does that help them anyway when it comes to influencing versus sort of the more traditional way of thinking about influencing from other leaders?
No, absolutely. I think, when you talk about the world of influence and influencers, that you really can't talk about that without thinking about social media and online influence. If someone has a, wide group of following, a wide following has, is saying things or doing things that creates this awareness or really a network that gives someone tremendous amount of influence ability, because the messages that they send become, widespread very quickly. So absolutely. And so not just thinking about it in terms of how do I build an audience or how do I have a following, but also, someone in Gen Z can take those kinds of social media savvy and bring it into the parts of the workforce that maybe aren't so savvy. Remember, a lot of keys to success, there are biases and things like that that exist. There's no doubt about that. I wouldn't submit for a minute that they're not. But the principles that we're talking about, they work very broadly. They're not bound to any age group or gender or region.
Yeah.
So then the question I always ask people is, what are the skills and abilities that you have or you've developed that you can use to help other people in your organization in a very honest and straightforward way? If you've got real strong social media skills, there are things you know how to do. There's a lot of other people that are sort of in my strata, the boomer strategy, or Gen X, that don't know. Help people in that capacity, right? The reciprocity. I'll help you, understand more about social media. I'll help you. There's definitely ways to even weigh in to help your own organization. If you can plug some of your followers in or some of your messaging in for your own organization, you become a very strong influencer. So it's absolutely the case. It's a whole tranche in marketing these days, is how do I, as a company, and the larger companies do this, they tap into influencer marketing. But you can do that inside your own organization as well by linking your following, attracting people to your workplace, right? There's all kinds of challenging ways and unique ways to bring people in as potential hires or candidates or create awareness for your products and services. And I would say people in Gen Z are really adept at that. And that's something that I would say many, many organizations need.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a good point to underscore that perhaps that could be a skill that the other generations can learn from that, to say that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they we know of so many young Gen Zers who created such a mass following, and how through the YouTube content that they create or the followership that they have. So I think there is a case to be made that you could be good in one way of influencing, but the digital is, as you rightly said, is such a vital and important way
Huge.
put out products and to build a brand. So I think that's a good point. One thing I want to ask here, Ed, is that oftentimes in influencing, they say that one of the reasons influencing fails is because we tend to look for the ways we get influence also to others. So in other words, if I get influenced with data and I want information, I may expect that Ed is also like that, and Ed may not want the details, right? So I guess that comes down to, like, how do we need to become a little more self-aware of the kind of people that we're kind of going to be talking about, right? So I work with details, you may not work with details, right?
That's right.
Can you just kind of talk at a big picture level, that, okay, what's the importance of self-awareness and how should Gen Z think about that, to really get to see that how self-awareness becomes a good tool for both themselves and also others, especially when they start leading teams.
Yeah, this is such a good point that you bring up. Self-awareness is probably the starting point for all of this, is understanding oneself. If you have too much of a focus on self and you have a worldview that says the way I see the world is the best way to see the world, what that will do is it'll impede your ability to do what we'll call understanding your audience. What are your needs? What are other people's needs in organizations? The way to become influential is to try to understand. I think I said this earlier, get into the minds of the people or the audiences that you're influencing. And that's by understanding what are the things that they need, what are their wants and desires, what messages resonate with them. So back to your point about data, if there's somebody that I work with that's particularly data driven, you'll want to make sure the case you make has data in it, right? You'll need to accommodate. It's not what I want, it's what that other person needs to enable this decision or enable this piece of information to be appropriately understood. So self-awareness comes to the point where I understand who I am, but I'm also willing to understand who other people are, because that's that's the essence, I think, really at the core, which you hit on, of influence is influencing. We tend to think is about us. I'm going to be influential. That's ideal, but it's really predicated on understanding what others need first, so that I can adapt my messages to that. I mean, think about it in an instance where you've got a message that resonated with you versus one that didn't.
Ah,
When a message resonates with you, whether it's information or data or a story, you almost feel like that person is talking to me. Like they're hitting on all the things that are relevant to me. And that's so critical. If people inadvertently get stuck in, I need to tell you what's important to me first. I'm not suggesting you never say that, but you miss the opportunity to really understand what the other or others need, and craft your message accordingly. And in anything on influence and persuasion, especially on visual or persuasion by data or the written word in any form or fashion, it all starts with really understanding what your audience's needs are.
yeah, fantastic. No, I think I just want to underscore that point. Very, very, very important for our listeners that that can take a substantive time to become self-aware. We mentioned this now, but because it's a journey, and we all know as learning professionals that perhaps there are ways in which we can find out. But I think it is important for the Gen Z to take the time to get to know themselves a bit better. And then, as you said, very importantly, it is not about you as much. I mean, it is important how you carry yourself, what's your blueprint, but it is the person across. And you worked with a lot of leaders at all levels around the world, and you worked with so many companies. Are there companies that stand out for you in your mind, which you say that what they have a fantastic influencing culture by way of the leaders are very influential, or even in a leader that you can think of in your own career or in the client setting that you feel that wow, these were some people who I thought were really good, and what made them so good.
Yeah, that's a great question as well. I have a hard time singling out any one organization as better than another. I think the culture of every organization is unique or different. Once you've seen one client, you've seen one client. They're all sort of different, and they all evolve over time. I think for early career professionals, the real question to ask is, where is the kind of place that their values and their culture speak to who I am and where I want to be as a up and coming professional. And oftentimes those are some of the top firms, that have done a good job, with programs that advance people from different cultures, different genders, where they give people a lot of opportunity. And more, you're seeing those in global organizations. A lot of my worldview is from North America and Europe, but the Far East and different parts of the world have amazing companies as well. So I mean, I always encourage people to think about fit. Where's a place where you're gonna feel like you'll fit, where the things that are important to you as a set of values and practices are also similar to the company. And we teach quite a bit on executive presence too. I think that's a very popular topic that I see, especially among early career professionals. And one of the things I tell people is it's like a Venn diagram. And I think it goes back to your question is before you try to stand out in your organization, make sure you fit in. And that really comes down to understanding the culture, the people, what the expectations are, and asking yourself, is this a place I want to be? But there's a lot of really top tier companies that fill that gap.
Yeah. No, I think excellent point. I think it's important to just highlight that again because you could be very successful in influencing in one context, and maybe that same approach may not work. As you say, the culture of the context changes, and so I think that level of adaptiveness is also very important. But the culture really kind of drives how you take that along.
Yeah, I can give you an example if that would be helpful. So just a twist of story. So my career, I started in the U.S. military in the United States Marine Corps. And being influential in the Marine Corps has a lot to do with someone's physical appearance, their physical abilities, certainly their intellect and their capabilities. But at that time I was there, and I think still to a large degree, that's an important part of being influential in that environment because that environment in particular looks at someone's intellect, their physical capabilities, their moral character as well. Let's translate that into a consultancy or a financial services firm. Someone's physical abilities probably aren't that important at a consulting firm, but someone's intellectual abilities may be much stronger. Let's look at a technology company or a high tech company. It's important to be smart for sure. Physical capabilities may not be as smart, but technical capabilities may be really important if you're writing code, for instance. So being influential in each of those different environments is going to relate to a different aspect of who you are as a person.
No, excellent example. I'm even very intrigued now. We'll do it at another time, Edward, to get to know the life as a Marine Corps. Just because it's a tough one, and I think the deepest of respect for those who kind of have that on their background. So just as a way to close out, Ed, just what are maybe one or two kind of do's and don'ts, if you will, for a manager who's sort of leading the young Gen Z? What should they do, not do when it comes to influencing? And then maybe we flip it also to the Gen Z, right? It isn't as much just all up the manager. What can they do and don't do, right? So maybe just some final tips of advice, call to action of the do's and don'ts on both sides.
Yeah, such a great question. I think you're exactly right. There's a lot of the workplace has a lot of misconceptions about people, right? It's easier, quote unquote, to put people into groups. Like there's the boomers and Gen X and Gen Z, and there are absolutely differences generationally. I don't want to submit for a moment that there aren't. I think if you're a manager, first off is try to check your bias at the door. Look at the people that you're privileged to be a manager or a leader of as individuals because they have different needs and wants, and they may be different than the things that you needed or wanted when you were, at that phase of your career. So, managers need to be aware of their biases and they also have to recognize that managers have a responsibility to develop talent, to build the skills and the capabilities of the people that work with them and for them. So that is really an individual activity. So I have to look at you as an individual if I really want to be effective and understand your unique capabilities and needs and the things that you want. And I think that's an important hallmark of every manager. So do take the time to get to know the people that work you. Don't put them in a bucket and say you're this kind of person because you fall into this. That's really it's not only unfair, it's probably quite inaccurate. So managers need to commit to developing the talent of the people that work with them, regardless of their age or gender or preferences of any sort and where they come from. We have to sort of take one person as one person. On the flip side, for a younger generation, take the time to do the same, but recognize, your boss or bosses may want things that you're not necessarily accustomed to being asked. Try to understand what's important to them. What are some of the things that make this an essential thing for me to do? Try to meet your manager where he or she is. But then you can negotiate and you hit the nail on the head. You can negotiate on, hey, I understand we need to do this, but if we do this, can I do that? Try to demonstrate your willingness to support the people that you work for, but also, when you need something or want something, try to articulate that in a way that your manager will understand the why behind that message, like what's important about that particular ask to you, and try to come to a negotiated agreement. Remember, your boss, as I tell when I work with younger students, I say, look, your boss has lots of problems. So you've got to ask yourself when you're talking to your boss, you put yourself in one of two camps. Am I helping my boss solve her problems, or am I adding problems to the
Right.
boss's plate? And I think that's a very simple way to think about, am I going to be the kind of person that helps take some of the pressure off my boss? Or am I the kind of person that adds pressure to my boss? So think about that, and just be judicious in how you approach your boss with certain things. I wouldn't submit you should never subordinate your most important desires or needs in the workplace, but it's that melding of, what does the organization need me to do? What do I want? And where can we find that common ground?
Yeah. No, what golden advice. I think, I hope that every every listener can take you that, you obviously want to influence, but be very conscious of, are you adding or taking away problems from their plate. And I really also like the fact that, if I'm a boss, let's not put them in a box, right? I think they bring a lot of capability. There's a lot of uniqueness in that generation that perhaps, people from your and I preparation can learn from. So I think two fantastic, pieces of advice as a way to close this. Ed, this has been wonderful, fantastic. I know you are a highly sought after person. So tell us a little more about where can people find you. Tell us a little bit more about the book, of course, and what are your some of your coordinates and how can people search you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the simplest way is just LinkedIn. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, just reach out. I've got, a bunch of people I'm connected to. You'll find me. I'm the professor of the practice of leadership at Brown. The company that I work for privately that does executive coaching and training is called Clear Coaching, CLIR coaching.com. But just a Google search, you'll find that stuff. But I think the book's available on Amazon, 12 Skills. And then we have a website. And the reason I mention the website is there's a lot of free resources on the website, just 12, the word 12skills.com. If you go there, you can download workbooks. You can use them for yourself. There's videos. I did a entire year-long video series of each skill per month at Brown. They're about an hour long on YouTube. So my point is there's all kinds of resources available if you're interested. And I encourage managers, if you have, people that you supervise, use some of those tools to help develop your team. You've got all the things on your plate. But I think what we found is people really like that. It's, 12 Skills is a course at Harvard Extension School. We're turning it into a certificate program at Brown. So I think it's been well received, and we're just excited to really bring people of all walks of life, of all different cultures and backgrounds and age groups, but especially younger folks, to give them the tools to be successful at work.
Fabulous, fabulous. I know, through Ed's work in the past, so he's always willing to give. So do reach out in any way you
Please, yeah.
yeah, any way which you can benefit individually or as a group of managers, as Ed has given the coordinates both at Brown and in his coaching capacity. So I want to thank you, Ed. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope that I'll be traveling to the U.S. Later this year. So hope,
Oh, good.
and in fact, my son is applying to Boston University as one of the schools. So we'll see if that happens. Maybe I have a reason to come in your town.
Well, that's where I went as an undergraduate. So
That's so happy to have a word with you it's a very competitive program that he's trying to get into. But your travels bring you to Asia. I'd love to meet you again in person, and
yeah.
all the very best. And this has been fabulous. Thank you once again. Take care and goodbye.
Thank you.